Okay, we are broadcasting live. We are here at the Universidad Autónoma de Aguascalientes. We are here with the third semester composition course, which is part of the BA program here at the university. And we are broadcasting live and with Parker, who is an exchange student from the United States. So we're having a class here today to get to know Parker a little bit more. Feel free to ask questions that you have, and we'll also be looking at some writing that he's done in the past, maybe describing a little bit of his experience with these particular writing documents. We'll be looking at some examples of his work. But it is meant to be participatory, so feel free to ask questions at any time about what we're discussing. So, without further ado, I think we'll go and get started here. Have a seat.
Okay. Hi guys. I think a few of you, I already know a few of you from other classes elsewhere. So raise your hand if you haven't met. We met? All of us have met? No? Well, I wanted, at the beginning of each class I've been coming to, I'm asking the students to just like throw a few questions my way so we can warm up a little bit and get to know me a bit before I just start kind of blabbering. So, my name is Parker. As you said, I'm the English teaching assistant here for the year. I graduated from college myself last June. Studied anthropology and literature at Bard College in upstate New York. Last year, I worked in the fall at a magazine as an editorial assistant, and then went from there and spent 6 months teaching at a university in the West Bank in Palestine called Al-Quds University, where I was working in the writing center and focusing on academic writing tutoring. So mostly like one-on-one. I didn't do a lot of stuff up in front of the class, and these were mostly academic essays. Which I think we'll be doing next week, if I'm not mistaken, and then some creative work as well. Here, I'm doing essentially this. Have any of you guys worked with the assistants in the past? I've been here like Wendy and Mateo, them, so you know what the deal is. Yeah. Any questions about me or where I come from or what I'm doing before we start?
No questions?
No questions? Do you guys want to come a little bit closer? Or?
Yeah, come on over. Any questions in general you want to know a little bit more about Parker?
I have a question.
What's up?
Do you know I speak Spanish?
I do speak Spanish, yeah. Yeah, that's my Spanish. You heard my Spanish? You heard my Spanish.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I can't in this class. That's only English in this class. Right?
How many languages do you know?
How many what?
Yes.
I speak English, obviously, and Spanish and Arabic. Kike.
Now we have a classmate and he likes that culture.
He likes the Middle Eastern culture. Okay. Great. I'd love to talk to him. Anything else? Or should we start? Nothing? Yeah. Okay. You guys are the third semester, correct?
Yes.
Is this the first writing class you've had to take it? Someone wants to look for, more or less? Okay. And you're working on business writing, essentially, or career. You've written cover letters so far, yeah? And statements of purpose. Right, you're working on that currently.
Right, we're working on statement of purpose and recommendation.
Recommendations.
And in a few, like, next we'll be working on emails, business type emails,
Okay.
and cover letters, and talking about business.
Okay, so I have a cover letter and I have a statement of purpose. So the statement of purpose was for the Fulbright, was for this. And I got it, the cover letter was written for a position that I didn't end up getting. But I think it's still valuable to look at why I think it wasn't the best cover letter and what's good about it. But maybe we'll start with the statement of purpose.
And let me, if I could, I'm going to go ahead and start on screen share so that we get this in the recording. So we'll no longer be showing our video, but now we'll be looking at basically the desktop.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll just bring it down and bring this up. So whatever copy.
So this is the request. Yeah, so I figured that I could read this to you guys and stop the points that I think are relevant to discuss and I think might help you as well as give you a sense of the overall structure. I kind of like, I learned a particular system for writing these things. The prompt was very general for this. It was describe your experience as an educator, describe why you want to come to Mexico, and talk about, whatever, that sort of thing.
And I'm sorry to interject here. And it's very important when he mentions prompt. What is a prompt? What do we mean? What does he mean by prompt?
So do you like to say?
Yeah, it's basically the instructions on what to include in this case, purpose statement. So whenever you're asked to create any type of written document, be very careful in understanding what they want. So one thing is showing you how to write it, but the prompt is very important. So in this particular case, he read a prompt which included what to include in this particular letter. So I just want to throw that out there. Be very careful, especially for this document that you're asked to write. For those of you who want to go and visit the United States, they will probably give you a prompt, hopefully, on what to include. So make sure that you read it very carefully to make sure that you're giving them what they want. Okay, sorry.
The problem. Okay. So maybe if we read through the general structure first, I can use how I went about this.
Maybe we'll
Sure.
Yeah, Jess.
How's that?
Yeah.
Good. So when I am assigned when I have to write a statement of purpose or a statement of grant purpose, I usually just begin writing down a lot of notes. I don't usually start out with a very kind of fixed structure, but I have a very general idea of one in mind in the back of my head that I'm going to later apply to those notes. So I usually have like a brainstorming session where I try and think always of a personal anecdote, an interesting anecdote that I can relate some way into the statement of purpose, right? A really important thing with these is to write optimistically about the position that you want and prove that you are qualified, and state very enthusiastically that you are qualified. But another task that you have with these is to really give the person who will be reading it a sense of yourself, right? A sense of your character, a sense of your personality, a sense of your history. So the way I organized this was first, I put candidate describes a challenging moment in his teaching experience. Because this fellowship is about teaching and education, the experience in question will be one about teaching, right? Candidate relays an experience relating to the host country, although I know for me most of this came with a personal statement. So this was coupled with a personal statement. Personal statement is a little bit different than the statement of purpose. Does anybody know how they would differ? So the statement of purpose is something that is tailored to the position applied for. Personal statement is also that, but it's more about you, right? It's all about you, right? So the difference between the two, as I just said, in my statement of purpose, I want to put in a little bit about myself. But also in the personal statement, you want to also put in a bit about your plans. So then they're complementary. They complement each other. You guys know that word? Sure. Okay, so Canada has an experience relating to the host country. I thought this was also important because part of the prompt asked why Mexico, essentially. And I had some experience living in Mexico, and I remembered meeting with a really incredible NGO that I wanted to write about somehow. And so I put them in there. We'll expand on that later. Candidate writes how this experience has prepared him for the position in question. So these two experiences, rather. So here I kind of combine what I share in these two episodes into something that is relevant to the application, something that's relevant to the prompt. Okay. So I mean, we'll go through this further, but essentially it's saying I've done this, I've done this, and these things qualify me. Why, right? And then at the end, I always like to provide a concise statement of purpose, right? Something that reaffirms everything that you kind of touched on or gone over, right? So at the end, you want to have a very clear statement. So maybe if we actually start from there, when we go backwards, as a way of kind of figure out. So I'll read it. It says, I've strived to grant my students agency in the classroom and to work with them in an individually tailored way that is most beneficial to their intellectual and personal development. I am eager to meet the challenges by teaching English in an unfamiliar place and in a different educational system with the confidence that my experience and open-minded approach will serve me well in benefiting whatever classroom I am assigned to. Furthermore, I believe that the time I spend traveling, living, and thinking in Mexico will serve me well in relating with my students on a personal level, while my experience as a writing tutor and editor will equip me with the necessary tools to be a skilled ETA, English teaching assistant. So that's 2 points, right? I've strived, followed by furthermore. Right? You really kind of want to hammer these things down deep. Why don't we go back to the beginning and start there? Any questions so far about the structure? Is this making sense?
Yes.
Okay. So Canada describes a challenging moment in his teaching experience. Do you guys want me to read this? I'll read over it and we can talk about it. I'll read it. For the past year, I've worked as a writing tutor for the Bard Prison Initiative, a degree-granting program that makes an education in the liberal arts available to individuals incarcerated within the New York State correctional system. The first paper that I was assigned to edit was a critical reflection on Ralph Waldo Emerson's notion of self-reliance, written by a first-year student at Sackett Correctional Facility. Appropriately titled Know Thyself, the paper was very poorly written, yet somehow still immediately compelling. His ideas were obviously good, they were hidden amid scores of grammatical errors and clunky syntax, and I had to work with the student to free his ideas from the post-constraints of an unfinished primary education. My first impulse was to put the paper face down on the table and talk through his argument, and as I developed as a tutor, I realized that the best way to help the student in need was indeed to establish a comfortable peer-to-peer relationship that was based primarily on dialogue. Once the student was comfortable enough to speak casually about their work, in their own words even, it was much easier for me to get a sense of the direction they wanted to take. Right, so in the yellow is where what's important about this really comes out, right? So by talking about this, I do 2 things here. One thing that I achieve is telling the application board about an experience, a work experience that I had, which was tutoring with BPI, with the prison initiative, right? And that's interesting enough to, I think, make them dig into the paper a little bit more than they would if I just start out in very general terms, talking about my interest in what they have to offer, right? So maybe you can hook them with certain things. But that follows directly into what's important about the paragraph, which was part of my kind of new educational philosophy as a young person involved in education, was the importance of dialogue. Okay? The importance of establishing equal relationships with your students and relating, which is why I think I'm in such a good position here, because I'm close to you guys' age, and I've just gotten through a similar experience, and so kind of halfway in between teacher and student. And I think that's super important and kind of undervalued in a lot of places, is that the young aren't really trusted to teach, to like hold the keys, but sometimes young people learn the most from people that are their age. mean, you need a bit of both, but I think it's a unique and kind of potentially very, very important position, very valuable position. So again, personal experience followed by this discussion of why it was important to me. So on to experience related to the host country. Does someone want to read this part? Read it aloud?
Okay.
You want to?
While spending a month in Mexico City, conducting field work for my undergraduate thesis, I was introduced to several individuals working for Estrategia Integral para la Mejora del Logro Educativo, an educational reform-based NGO operating in rural districts that expose one-on-one tutor to the student relationship. The students worked closely with tutors and had selected the core of their own coursework. The program's model was to emphasize the importance of peer-based and mutually beneficial learning, where the tutor is as much of a student as his or her advisor. When I arrived back at school from Mexico, I actually worked to assimilate the strategies employed by EIMLE in my own tutoring with BPI.
Okay, thanks. So what's BPI here? Where did we hear about BPI? The Board Prison Initiative. So that came in the first paragraph, right? When I talked about tutoring in the prison, right? So what's important about this? Here we have another kind of interesting anecdote, right? It's about these people that I met in Mexico City, which also does two things. It says, I've been to Mexico, I have a little bit of experience in this country, and I've met these very interesting people working at a very interesting organization, right? So it's kind of boastful, but sometimes you have to do that. You have to kind of you have to name drop, you have to list your connections. But then it also allows me to develop a relationship between the first paragraph, this first experience, and the second one. So I say when I got back to school from Mexico, I was still working as a tutor, and I thought about some of the things that I talked to with people at this organization in Mexico, and brought them into, have them inform or help my experience of teaching with BPI. Does that make sense? So what that last sentence does is establish a causal relationship between the two first paragraphs. Between that first experience, first challenging experience with education, and second experience related to the host country. Now this might be a model that you guys can keep in mind if you are planning on studying abroad or you're applying for fellowships abroad, you don't necessarily have to have been to the country in question. Oftentimes it's actually better not to have been. But something that is detailed and relates directly to the place in question, right? So the candidate writes how this experience has prepared him for the position in question. Anyone else want to read this part?
As a young educator, I have focused on developing a fair and communicative presence in the classroom, and have continually looked for inspiration in educational programs that I admire in order to find alternative ways of improving the learning experience of my students. I found both in observing the success of EI and OE, and in my own experience at BPI, that a successful or teacher must be both flexible and conscientious of every learning stage. Do I? What?
Yeah.
Learning how to speak a foreign language in particular requires a unique kind of courage. The prospect of speaking an unfamiliar language in front of anyone is unfriendly.
There's a typo.
Okay, anyone. And there will be a productive learning. The students must be ready to comfortably engage with their teacher, one who has a clear idea of how each of his or her students learns, how each student feels in a particular learning environment, is best equipped to establish an adaptive teaching style that can answer the needs of all.
Okay. Yeah, there's a few typos in this paragraph. That's really embarrassing. It's all right though. Thanks. So what's going on here? What's going on with this paragraph?
It was including your opinion about who is a successful tutor or teacher.
Right. So how does this differ from the first two paragraphs?
I wonder.
It's more like a problem, maybe.
Yeah, it's more like a proposition, right? I've stopped talking about myself, kind of, and this is a mix. This is the one that precedes the last concise statement, right? So this is the paragraph that has to marry or bring together these experiences that I've shared and how I'm qualified, right? Why I see myself as being a good fit. So I say that I am justified in speaking, in stating my opinions about what students need, partly because I've had these two experiences that I've shared, right? So you build yourself up as a legitimate voice. You build yourself up as someone who knows what he's talking about, right? And only then can you prove to these people that are going to be reading your statement of purpose that you are, a legitimate voice, right? And also a legitimate candidate. So I start here. Learning how to speak a foreign language in particular requires a unique kind of courage. So this is acknowledging the difficulty of the position, right? Because it's not just any teaching job. It's teaching ESL, something that is a totally different beast than just teaching English, right? And also, I could probably say this out of the assumption that I at one point had to be in Spanish class, embarrassing myself and being very frightened and speaking Spanish in front of a teacher who was from Latin America or Spain and whose Spanish was perfect, and with a lot of my classmates whose Spanish was better than mine, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that this is a unique and very difficult environment, and students are very sensitive in this environment, so one has to take that into account when teaching.
To let them know that you understand well.
Right. Yeah. Which is why this whole idea of one-on-one I think is really valuable. Like when I was teaching in the West Bank, a lot of the students, their English was pretty poor, and the worse their English was, the more afraid they were to come into the writing center to visit and to work on their writing. And one way of addressing that problem was going outside the classroom, approaching them and becoming friends, because I can do that, and it's also in keeping with this educational philosophy that's really about the teacher learning from the student too, right? So going in as a teacher, I'm not expecting to speak monolithically about things and to dump knowledge on someone and have them download it, but to communicate and learn something every time that you teach, right? So from there, any questions so far? Is everyone following more or less? Okay. We move from that into this concise statement of purpose, right? So now we've left behind, for the most part, these experiences, these anecdotes are in the back of our minds. What they did for us was to, again, grant the applicant the legitimacy of speaking and of stating his purpose. Now that purpose has to be stated in the clearest terms as possible, right? The clearest way possible. So we'll read it again. I've strived to grant my students agency in the classroom. You guys know agency, this word?
I haven't.
Agency means like freedom and control.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, what is strict? I don't know.
I've strived. It's like a slightly emphatic, like emphasized way of saying I've tried.
Yeah. Okay.
This is what I've done. It's like a struggle.
Okay.
You know, it implies a struggle. And that's, so I use a phrase like that in the last paragraph to put emphasis on that, right?
Yeah.
To really kind of bring the point home with stronger language than I was using before.
Okay.
I've strived to grant my students agency in the classroom and to work with them in an individually tailored way that is most beneficial to their intellectual and personal development. I am eager to meet the challenges by teaching English in an unfamiliar place and in a different educational system with the confidence that my experience and open-minded approach will serve me well in benefiting whatever classroom I am assigned to. Furthermore, I believe that the time I've spent traveling, living, and thinking in Mexico will serve me well in relating with my students on a personal level, while I experience as a writing tutor and an editor will equip me with the necessary tools to be a skilled ECA. Okay. So this is important here, right? This is re-emphasizing that I have this confidence, and the reader knows where that confidence comes from, in part, because I've talked about those two experiences. I think that's all I have. In terms of the things that I highlighted, there's some important language that I think would be helpful for you guys. Not so much in this one as in the cover letter, because I think, I don't know, maybe Benjamin disagrees, but I think the statements of purpose should be written almost like personal essays, you know? So the ones that I write are usually free of the kind of formal language that you might see in a cover letter. This requires both the cover letter and the statement of purpose and a personal essay, so you kind of got the whole spectrum of writing. This one is kind of in between the cover letter and the personal statement, right? Because it's part personal, part formal. But in terms of the topic sentences, like, this doesn't have that many that you might see normally. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. And when looking at, I've got a couple of questions. Before I ask my questions, do you guys have any particular questions about what he's presented so far in his purpose statement to you, as far as either what he's ultimately written or anything with regard to the process, how we wrote it?
Well, not a question, just to restate what you said. Just reference in shorter words, like all the because you
All the steps?
Well, yeah, just in a simple way.
Okay. So, challenging experience.
Oh.
So the first part would just be a challenging experience, or an episode in the applicant's life. It doesn't have to be challenging necessarily. But this is, I don't want to make you guys believe that this is kind of like a universal system, right? The prompt was specifically about challenges experience, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I approached it this way.
You're just like settle the background.
Right. Yeah.
And so the prompt was to share a challenging experience that you faced. Was that basically?
It was like talk about your experience in education, what has been challenging, and it was a kind of a long prompt, and why do you feel, why Mexico essentially also.
Why Mexico? And
Why
also-
LTA?
Okay, and why you would be a good candidate for this position?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So you can approach that kind of prompt in many different ways. I think they expect you to also. I really, I use this idea of the challenging experience or the informative experience to really tailor the way that the structure of the essay would end up looking like. The second part, another experience, but related specifically to the country. So, the context. So contextual.
And the context is like what you want.
The context is Mexico, the context is location. Yeah. But that also does a bit of both, because yes, the context is Mexico, but it's also a place that I was really interested in because of the things they were doing with education, because of their ideas.
Yeah.
So it's two. it sets a scene for the paper in Mexico, it makes me seem a little bit more knowledgeable about the place I'm applying to. It also gives an example of a very interesting organization that I think is pretty well respected in this country by educators. And there's just kind of a thin association here that I think might help as well. The next step would be to write about how those experiences qualify him for the position, right? So you have to find some way to glue what these experiences you've been sharing with why you think that you're the right person for the job, right?
Notice too how, and these are the three main sections, right, Parker, and then you conclude with the part statement.
Yeah.
So notice again, he's got three main sections, and notice the order in which he's presenting each one of those three. For example, if he had started with this at the beginning, it would have changed the whole, it would have been different, right? So one way to look at it, you correct me if I'm wrong, Parker, that perhaps this paragraph is the most important in the sense that, or look at it like, this is me before, this is context, this is general, then the second paragraph a little bit more specific, again about him, but more specific within a certain context, and then the third paragraph, the most important, which is the job in question, why he would be a good candidate. Obviously, all of it links to this, and he's connecting these, but see how he's presenting the order of these three, going kind of specific or general to the more specific or to the most important, that third paragraph being the actual job that he's applying for. And I don't know if that was...
No, I would totally agree with you. I think that's definitely the most important part because it's where it's joined and it's where things really start to make sense, you know? Because yeah, you can read this kind of, this history that I'm offering, but it's not necessary until it becomes really relevant, to the position at hand, right? To the application. And then at the end again, there's the restatement of a more concise and cleaner version of a statement of purpose. Because all of this, everything in this paragraph, you can find scattered throughout the paper, but it's restated at the end, right? And oftentimes people read, when you apply for things, people they read so many different essays. Oftentimes the only thing that sticks with them is what they read first and last. So you really have to make these last paragraphs, hit home to you.
Okay, so just to be clear. So first you start in your opinion on how you managed to do this. You started with an experience that you had, and then you follow that experience or your self background to go and to say why would you like to come and why are you doing this and why is it interesting to you, but you're also saying I know about this, right, in a way, and then you go to the next one to say all right, so as I have been trying to say, I'm good at this and I think this, and I think that it will be good if you do this to me or did this to me.
Yeah.
And then that's when you say all that, but clearer and just shorter version of it.
Right.
You presented the three ideas that you put in the first, the second, and the third paragraph. You said just move from.
Yeah. So importantly, the ideas are different than the experiences I'm talking about, right? So the idea here is in yellow. I realized that the best way to help the student in need was indeed to establish a comfortable peer-to-peer relationship that was based primarily on dialogue. Okay? So that relates directly to what I say I'm interested in or I value with this organization in Mexico, right? And I say something similar. The program's model is to emphasize the importance of peer-based and mutually beneficial learning when the teacher is as much of a student as his or her advisee. That's another idea statement that is gleaned or taken from a personal experience that I've shared. And then those ideas are restated here in a way. And I talk about the I introduced what I think the challenges in general of teaching ESL are, and why I think I'm qualified, which relates to the two experiences, and then everything is restated at the end.
Think of it like in the meal plan when we were developing, even though that we talked about it in terms of an academic essay, but look at the structure here. You can look at how he's presenting evidence, that is, his experience, and then the analyze or the comment, he's commenting on it. And that's what he's stating here, oftentimes in yellow or after. There's a pattern where it's his experiences, and then his comment, his interpretation, his analysis of those experiences. See that? So it would be very different if he presented his comments first, then his experiences. It would be incoherent. It would be strange, right? The order. So it's the evidence typically, right, or the details, or the examples, or in this case, his experiences, and then some comment or analysis, or right.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about this example? I have one final thing I'd like to comment. If you could go to the last paragraph, at the very first sentence. Notice here he says, "I've strived to grant," and grant, what's grant mean? To grant? To give. So I've strived to grant my students agency. He could have said, granted my students, okay, agency. What's the difference? Why say I've strived? Why not just say I granted? What's the difference?
Depends. Then he's saying that he really tried to give his students.
Right, then why not say I granted my students agency?
More intense.
More intense? What does that mean?
No, just kidding.
No?
Sounds like
If you change the words, it sounds like he is not doing that anymore.
If he changes the words, like, so we have two options. He can say it like it is, I strive to grant, or he can say, I've granted students. Why not say, I've granted students agency? What's wrong? What's the difference there between that and how he has it? What do you think? I mean, could he have said that? I've granted students?
maybe with the other could be like aggressive.
Aggressive. And what does that mean by aggressive?
Like, it's like, I grant my students, it's like, I did it. I did it because I want it. Or like, something like that.
And why not say it like that?
I don't know.
Sounds what?
I don't know, like, it sounds like, that, maybe you're bossy. I don't know, like.
Like carefully
Uh-huh.
with the reader.
I'm sorry?
It sounds like carefully with the reader.
Okay, so you're being more careful, Mario?
Yeah, there's like what you say, you have to be carefully with the tone that you use.
Exactly. And when he says here, I've strived to grant, okay, he's not indicating whether or not he was successful or not. He could have been successful, he could have not been successful, but he's not saying that. If he says, I granted my students agency, what is he saying? All 100%, all the students, right, were granted agency. So there's a big difference in tone. That's the key point here, is the tone, like how you are coming across, right? If someone were to read this, how would they think if you say, I've strived to grant my students agency, or if you say, I granted all my students agency, how are they going to perceive you, right? Right? And this is the key point, using your words carefully, right? Because the meaning is pretty close. It's close. It's a little bit different. But the tone has a much different impact when someone reads it. Because he's really writing this for someone to get to know him, right? They want to get to know this person. And so when they read this, these small changes make a big difference. Okay. Any other questions, comments? I'm curious, did you start with any one of these paragraphs first? How did you develop this? Did you come up with these headings first?
No, these headings were, I put in my class.
Okay.
Yeah, these were just for
Okay.
to help today.
But as far as the like in the way that you presented this, was there any particular, did you start from the first paragraph on?
I started from my experience at BPR, at the Prison Initiative, because I'd written about it before, but also I knew pretty well what I'd gotten from it, why it was a valuable experience, and I felt comfortable writing about it. A little bit less comfortable explaining why I was qualified to be an ETA.
Okay.
So I started with what I knew,
Okay.
and what I was proud of, I guess, and then built from there, and took some risks,
Right.
but use that as kind of the base. And that's kind of my style, I think. I write what I'm comfortable with, and then kind of and then go from there.
Right. And how many times? I mean, when you go your editing process, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, do you like to finish the entire thing and then take a look, or do you focus on one particular paragraph? How many times typically do you like do it on different days, or can you talk a little bit about how you go through the writing process?
I'm kind of a lazy editor.
Okay.
I expend a lot of energy in getting everything down, and then I'll mainly go over it. I'll print it out and mark it up maybe once or twice, and then I close my eyes and click send.
Okay.
No, but I mean, when I was writing this, I was applying for a lot of stuff simultaneously,
Okay.
so I didn't have that much time to dedicate to any single one thing. I was recycling certain things and mixing around. So and you can do that too. If you feel very good about a particular piece of writing, you can take it and then adapt a little bit to something else. Obviously, you write new stuff and try and reinvent what you said, but it can be a good part. When I was writing my thesis, for example, and I was writing the kind of introduction, which in some ways is similar to a statement of purpose, is where you have to concisely, kind of frame everything that you'll be writing. I had like 10 drafts or something. And my favorite way to edit is at night and by hand with a hard copy and mark it up. And to read aloud also. To read aloud and to use your hand to make it a physical exercise and not just a cognitive one, not just when you're reading a computer.
Well, I wanted to ask you about reading aloud, because we've been talking a little bit about reading aloud and the importance of just hearing yourself. Not only the grammar and structure, but sometimes when we write really long sentences and we're running out of breath, that is also a good indication too that maybe we need to reduce the sentence.
And also, I noticed typos for the first time, and it's because this is probably the first time I've read this entire thing aloud. And I also noticed some places that could have used some different punctuation, because you only really get a sense of the true rhythm of what you've written once you read it aloud, as you're saying. Once you have to insert a pause for a breath, or you feel yourself skipping along to grab a little bit.
Okay.
What time are we at?
It's 1 o'clock. We got still some more time, I think, right? Or do you have?
Well, I have to.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. Okay, no, that's great. So yeah, So I guess we can conclude there. Does anyone have any final comments or questions, or anything else that you want to add? We conclude. I'm glad you told me. I wasn't even thinking.
Yeah. Sorry, we should have talked about that before.
No problem.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Okay. So, no more questions? No. All right. Parker, thank you very much for being here. We're going to have several classes. We'll have several classes throughout the semester with Parker doing different activities. And I'll try to let you know beforehand when we'll be doing that. We'll try, depending on the type of activity, also to have some sort of record of doing this in the form of either recording or something. But yeah, this was very informative. Thank you very much, Parker. And yeah.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks.
guys. There's also another document if you guys are going to continue doing similar stuff. You can feel free to play around. It's a couple better.
Yeah, well, that'll definitely come in handy in a couple of weeks when we start doing camera based.
All right.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Come back.
See you guys.
Bye. Exhibition.